All right, well, thanks. I appreciate you inviting me. For those who don't know me, I'm John Kaminsky. I'm associate professor at Penn State, and Bill and Turf Republic asked me, and then obviously Cale and Brandon to come and kind of give some kind of what to watch for in 2014. And I thought that, based on my background, that I would start off by talking a little bit about diseases and some of the new things that we've been seeing, both here in the United States, some stuff that was new in the last couple of years, some stuff that I saw a few years ago but that I always want to make people aware of, and then I just took a trip to Australia where they're dealing with all kinds of weird things that I've never seen, which, Brandon, you would appreciate being over there and seeing some new diseases. But I'll just show kind of a slide of what they're dealing with, and then kind of say leave it at more to come as they start to figure out some of the problems. I know that this group, and Bill, you're taking more of an international approach, and I know you have your turf chats based in Australia, so I thought I'd share that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to screen share my talk, and hopefully it comes through. I think it's up there. If anybody doesn't see it, then just shout out, but I'm going to move forward as if it does. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today are turfgrass disease trends, and then also some trends in technology really related to some of the things that I've been working on, both TurfPath, the app that I released in April of last year, and also kind of an update on turf diseases. That was a website I had started several years ago and has kind of fallen off, but is being revived this year, and I'll talk about that. So with that, I'm going to get started. So we're going to talk about diseases, but we're also going to talk about some technology and social media, which is pretty much right up my alley. I'll go back. I wanted to also mention, if you can see the arrow, you can follow me at iTweetTurf. That's kind of my Turfgrass account. You can follow Turf Diseases at that Twitter handle there, and then you can follow TurfPath, the mobile app, on Twitter as well. So finally, I want to thank Turf Republic, Bill, for inviting me to speak. All right, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is a project that we've been working on probably for the last maybe about 3 years now, 3.5 years. And that's a new malady or problem called thatch collapse. And essentially it does exactly what you see here, which is causes a depression in the turf canopy. This problem is actually interesting. It was in 2010 I took a trip to Scotland with Peter Noden and Stan Zontek, and we saw a problem what they were referring to on their putting greens, and even their approaches on fescue. They're called a thatch collapse. And I had never seen anything like it or heard about it. And then when I got back to the States, I started to see similar symptoms on our research putting green at Penn State. And so we started investigating it. Now, I'll preface this by saying what I saw in England on the fescue, I don't think is the same problem that we're seeing in the States, but it really spearheaded the initial kind of research into the project. And so this is a symptom. You can kind of see what it looks like. Essentially what happens is the organic matter degrades and the patches just collapse, causing a serious decline in the quality of the turf grass. Now this presentation, I have a half hour, so I'm going to breeze over some things so I don't take up everybody else's time. But since reporting this was about 2010, we started to see it on our research facility here, and so we started making inquiries about, okay, where's the problem really occurring? And we started getting samples from throughout the United States. California was probably one of the first places, Ohio, Michigan, Montana, and also into Pennsylvania. South Dakota, which is our probably worst sample that we have, meaning the most severe, we've got samples from there too. So you see it's fairly widespread and under a wide range of environments. It's not all creeping bentgrass or Poa annua. It's actually can be found on a lot of different species. And then what really spearheaded my trip to Australia and New Zealand in December, in discovering what ultimately became the pathogen or the organism that causes this, we started working with a professor here at Penn State who has been working on this organism in a totally different capacity, going back all the way to when I was an undergraduate here, and I'll get into that a little bit. But at the same time that we started finding out what it was here in the States, we talked to him because he was the expert, and then he said, oh, it's funny because I have samples that came from New Zealand and Australia from the New Zealand Sports Turf Institute, and a woman named Megan Cushnahan. And they basically isolated the organism and sent him samples to do DNA testing on it. And we started collecting our samples at the exact same time. And what we found was that it was the exact same organism. So it's pretty widespread. And I think that what's happening is, I don't think this is anything that's necessarily brand new. I just think we're drawing attention to it because we started asking about samples and symptoms and things that were slightly different than what you would expect with, say, something like a fairy ring. So if we look at a profile of an infected area, what we end up seeing is something similar to what we would see with a fairy ring. And you get a patch where the organism will move from the inside of the patch here on the right, and then it will move across, and you can really see the activity where it's kind of orange. You see the mycelium, and essentially it's just moving in an outward radial pattern, causing a degradation of the organic matter. And if you look at the difference between the inside or the center of the patch in terms of thatch and organic matter versus the outside of the patch where it has yet to degrade it. Bigelow, I don't know if that's you. I think you might have some sound coming in the background. But where you see it's outside and not degraded, you can really see how it just starts to go through and degrade that area. And what happens is it degrades it so fast and so rapidly that the inside of those patches sink and they collapse down. All right, so that's basically what we were seeing. So in terms of symptoms and what you can see and some of the things to look for, we typically see circular patches about 18 to 45 centimeters in diameter. Essentially, you can get to about a softball size patch up to a fairly large pie plate in diameter. And the turf in the center ends up becoming dark green from that thatch degradation. But I have to reiterate, this isn't a disease so much in that it's killing the turf. What happens, and the only way that I can really describe it, if you have an employee at your golf course that sets the cup too low, and they sink it down or recess that cup back into the putting surface, you end up mowing over top of it, and everything around it gets mowed at a very low height. But then the sample that's set too low, or the cup that's set too low, the leaves end up getting longer and shaggier, and so they take on like a darker green, wider blade appearance. And that's exactly what you see with this particular problem. And so it looks like somebody set the cup too low, except the patches are, a foot or more in diameter. If you pull a sample out, sometimes you can see the white mycelium present in the thatch layer. It definitely has a mushroom odor, so it's very similar to the other fairy ring type organisms. And then you can also see that orange hue or color that you can see within the infested thatch. And that's something that I kind of hinted to in that picture that I showed prior. The symptoms are not limited to one turfgrass species, and it can affect both cool and warm season grasses. So really it's about organic matter and thatch, more so than what the species is. So we've seen it on creeping bentgrass, colonial bentgrass, velvet bentgrass, Poa annua, as well as some of the warm season grasses with Bermuda. So as we start looking at this, we go, what the heck is causing this? And we tried to do isolations, and we had limited success because we didn't really know what we were looking for. And then we got a sample in from California where we saw these fruiting bodies in there right at the beginning. And at the same time, we had been talking with Don Davis at Penn State, who originally did all of this work with the organism Cerobolus styletus. And most people know this, at least in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, most people know this as artillery fungus. And so what happens is this would get into people's mulch, and the artillery fungus would form these little wet spore masses called gleba that are in the center of these little orange fruiting bodies. They would essentially invert and shoot out, and they could shoot several meters and get caught in the wind. And then if you look at the side of your house, they would basically peg the side of your house, and you'd have all these little dots here of these spore masses. And these spore masses are actually, they just lie there and rest, and they don't really go anywhere. They don't die. If we wanted to collect inoculum, we could just go scrape them off of here and use them as new inoculum to infest new areas. But what happened from the standpoint of homeowners back in the 90s, probably mid-90s and late 90s, people were claiming insurance claims on these things, and then finally it got to be such a bad problem that insurance companies were like, forget you, we're not even going to allow you to claim this. And I can say that when I moved to Connecticut in 1994 and 95, we were looking for homes, and we looked at a home that we really liked, and the whole side of the house was littered with these things, to the point that the siding looked tan, and we backed off on buying that house simply from that perspective. And so it was a real problem in mulch, but it never made the transition to turf. It was unheard of, because we had mulch beds around turf areas quite frequently. So it wasn't really something that we thought of as being transferable to turf. But as we started looking at our samples, you can see here's a sample that we received. This is, I think this is a velvet bentgrass sample, or maybe it's creeping bentgrass. But essentially, you can see after we incubated it, we had these fruiting bodies starting to develop. And they're, from a pathology standpoint, I always make the joke that this is like my centerfold shot, and this is my calendar where I like open it up to look at the centerfold. The organism is unbelievable to work with. It's pretty fun. You can see these spore masses being shot out. And so essentially they start out as these kind of enclosed masses. As they mature, they start to break open, and you can see the darker tan color in the center here. That's the spore mass. And so what happens is, as light hits it, it starts to break down some of the proteins. There's a change in the sugars, and this inner cup or inner lining essentially inverts, and it inverts at a very forceful, in a very forceful way, and it shoots that spore mass. It shoots it right out and into wind currents or against sidings. And so what happens is, this thing basically will shoot and aim towards anything very bright or white, because that reflective light that's hitting it helps aid in the breakdown of those proteins and the change in sugars, and that's what causes that to invert. And so we've put samples or siding. We've taken samples of siding, house siding, and put it into a fairway where this was a problem, and we've seen the spores being shot out at it. So you imagine that if you get a sample, or if you get the problem or the disease in your golf course, essentially under the right conditions where these masses of spores are being produced, you have quite a bit of inoculum that can just stay there. And as I mentioned, those spore masses don't go away. They sit there forever. So like we could have, we could pick those spore masses off the side of a house, and we could sit them in the lab for years, and then we could go back and put them under the right conditions, and they would germinate and start to grow. So they have a pretty long life ahead of them. So the initial stage for us was to first combine it with the samples from Australia and New Zealand, along with the ones that we had collected in the United States, and do DNA sequencing. And what we found is that they were pretty much, except for one sample that was 98%, they were pretty much 99% identical to the samples that we received from mulch. And so we knew right away, all right, at least the organism we're getting out of these samples is Cerobolus styletus, and potentially causing the problem. But as any pathologist will know, just because you can isolate something from a sample doesn't necessarily mean it's causing the problem. There could be a lot of organisms in there. And so what we had to do is we had to complete a process known as Koch's postulate, which we had to be creative in our attempt to do this, because it's not really a disease. It doesn't kill the turf. It doesn't infect it and cause death, but we have disease-like symptoms in that the patches will decline or depress into the sample. So we looked at it in a different way. We basically took mature plants from a creeping bentgrass green, and we incubated them for about 6 weeks under constant conditions, 12 degrees Celsius, and which is, I think, in the mid-60s, I think maybe mid-50s. I don't know. I have to do the calculations. 30, 49, 41. Yeah, it's like low 50s or mid-50s. And we did that for 24 hours light at 6 weeks. And we know that the permanent light really encourages the development of the fruiting bodies. So we inoculated these plugs with sterilized thatch, with no thatch, and then with the infested thatch. You can see on the picture on the right the amount of growth that we got after about 6 weeks. We essentially had the sample almost running through, or the organism almost running through the entire sample. And then in the upper left and lower right, Bigelow, I'm going to mute you because you're typing. In the upper left and lower right, we have samples that were uninoculated, and although the turf started to decline because it's under constant light, we didn't have that organism growing through, causing a degradation. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to get through all the data that we collected on it, but I will show this data slide that I think explains a lot. So we did loss on ignition, which is essentially to collect the organic matter and then burn it off and determine the amount prior to and the amount after. And what we found is that we ended up with about a 21% reduction in organic matter when we infested it with this organism versus when we didn't do anything. And although if you look at it on the bar scale, it doesn't look all that significant. I mean, it's 1.4% down to about 1.18%. It actually works out to about 21%. And if you think about that in terms of organic matter removal on a golf course in a season, that's about an aggressive program at thatch removal from an aerification. Maybe you can get to about 20% over the course of an entire season for multiple aerifications. And this organism did it in 6 weeks just by a biodegradation. And so we saw a significant reduction. We also saw a significant, about a 25% decrease in thatch depth. And so essentially you can understand why it sinks down, because you're losing about 25% of that space, and so it sinks. And so we felt like we did a good job proving, one, that you can see here, it's not a pathogen. It essentially goes through and it eats away all the thatch. In fact, all the organic matter that you can see off to the side of where this area was inoculated has a fairly good consistency of some sand, but quite a bit of organic matter. And in the center, all you see is perfectly white, healthy stolons and stem bases, where all that organic matter and declining material got basically degraded. And so you've got no stability in the center of this patch, and they just sink down and disappear. And so essentially that's what's going on here. Again, it's not a disease, but it's more of a disease-like organism that causes disease-like symptoms. So to wrap up the thatch collapse, it's something to be on the lookout for. I don't know if we call it a new problem. It's a new awareness of a problem. The first report in New Zealand was 2003. So, we're talking about 10 years ago they've been seeing this thing. But they're just now getting a handle on how to manage it. And so they have some recommendations. We know this Cerobolus styletus, which is that artillery fungus, is, I say, a causal agent, because there may be more. There may be other organisms that cause thatch degradation as well, but this one is the one that was primarily associated, or really only associated, with all those samples we got from the U.S. and the ones in New Zealand and Australia. Now, we did a lot more work on this outside of just looking at temperatures of growth. We looked at a lot of the enzymes involved in the degradation, and we know that lacase is probably the primary lignin degradation component, and this isn't anything that's unusual. There's been researchers at the University of Georgia that have been working on similar type trials down there, looking at degradation with lacase that they essentially buy from a company out of China. And so it's not lacase from this organism, but that's really the primary component. They actually have a use patent on lacase as a degradation, and they're trying to bring it to the market as a way to have a sprayable thatch degradation material. So that could be pretty cool if it ends up coming to market. The one thing I'll say that was different is that we did not see a spike in the lacase, and we didn't see that associated with thatch degradation when we looked at the mulch isolates from Cerobolus styletus. So there appears to be, even though they're very similar organisms and they're nearly identical, there appears to be some kind of shift or divergence in the ability for lacase to degrade the organic matter from those two different isolates that we collected. What most people watching this care about is how do we manage it, and we don't really have a good answer for it right now. In New Zealand, they have the most information. The latest studies show that Instrata seems to be the fungicide of choice for them. But there's nothing really in strata except for medallion that I could imagine would have an impact on, this basidiomycete. Medallion seems to be the one component, but they don't have medallion as a standalone product over there. And so Enstrata is what they use. They also have a product, and I don't remember what they call it, but it's essentially ciproconazole, which is the old Sentinel. They have that available there. We don't have it here, and that seems to be doing fairly well also. So maybe the DMIs have a little bit of an impact, medallion for sure, and then our general recommendations around here are to stick with the fairy ring fungi. It's still a fairy ring-like, or a basidiomycete. It's like a fairy ring-like organism. So we typically say those products like ProStar or Heritage, Endorse or Affirm, that will help you suppress fairy ring, should at least theoretically help you suppress this one. Now, one of the interesting things I picked up on my talk or my visit to New Zealand was that the superintendents, I thought you'll never get rid of the symptoms because essentially you're degrading the thatch. But what they're finding is if they catch it early enough in the season, when symptoms first come in, they can actually stop the movement of the pathogen or the organism, and they don't get all that depression. And even when they have some depression into those patches, for some reason they seem to be able to have it grow out of it if they stop it. So curative treatments are still effective, but if you have chronic problems with it, you're dealing with it, you're one of the few courses that deal with it every year, then you're going to want to get on some preventive program. And then we say, put it with a wetting agent, water it in lightly to get it into that canopy. That's something to be done. And then aside from that, thatch management's key. It's a organism that really goes after high organic matter content areas. And so you have to manage your thatch through cultivation and core aerification. But then if you do have these patches, the only really way to smooth them out quickly is to top dress into those, and you end up with these little pie plate patches of a lighter color area where the top dressing settles in, but that essentially is going to help smooth out the surface. So that's our conclusion so far. We've got a lot of work in the ground here. We inoculated our area in 2012, and we didn't see any symptoms in 12, and then last year we started to see a little bit of symptoms coming in, and I'm hoping this year that the organism inoculation points had enough time to start growing radially that we get some good symptoms, and then we can start doing some studies to look at it. So that's basically what we have with thatch collapse. And again, this is what it looks like in case you joined late. That's not a push-down version. That's essentially just sitting two golf balls side by side. One right on the edge of the patch, which if you stepped on that area, if you step right here, it'll be as firm as that green was, and you step an inch inside of it, and your foot will sink right in. And if you put your foot right in the middle here, it'll just roll back and forth. It's so much degradation. So it's a big problem if you have it. I won't say it's widespread, but keep an eye out on it. All right, the next thing that I'm going to talk about, and Bill, you can mention how much time I have. I don't know when we started. I know it's almost 10:30, but we started a little bit after introduction. So
yeah, you got another 5 or 10 minutes, John.
All right, we're good then. Okay, so Pythium patch. This is something that I talk about, and everybody goes, "Why are you talking about it? It's not an issue," and that may be the case. But it was a problem that I saw when I was in Connecticut quite a bit, and I saw samples down in Maryland, and it really has only been a mid-Atlantic Northeast thing. But it's something that seemed to be unusual, and I bring it up any chance I can on these kind of new emerging problems things, because I want people to send me samples if they see things that they think they might be dealing with this. So around 2005 and 6, we started to see a problem. We didn't know it was a Pythium at the time, but we ultimately found out that it was, that attacked annual bluegrass. And it attacked it in a way that looked identical to summer patch. Very slow moving, slow to develop. The bent grass would start filling in these patches. But you really didn't see anything other than what you thought was summer patch. And then as you look more closely and you incubate the samples, you can start to see some mycelium developing on the leaves, but really, really fine, not blown out like you would normally see with a Pythium, but we started seeing Pythium associated with it. And here's really a classic picture of what it looks like. And to me, if I look at this and I'm standing out on a golf green, and Brandon probably would think the same thing, no doubt that's summer patch. There's just no way it's anything else. You've got POA, a patch, and you've got bent grass filling in the center. This is classic summer patch symptoms, and that's what we thought it was. But the go-to treatment for me for curative summer patch is thiophanate methyl, and we could basically dump that stuff on here and it wouldn't do anything. And we started looking at other potentials, and what we consistently did is we were isolating out Pythium torulosum and Pythium catennulatum. They were always on a native soil putting green with poor drainage in an area where they had top dress, but they really didn't have any internal drainage. We know that it was selecting only annual bluegrass and really didn't move to bent grass much at all unless you really let it go and just didn't care about it, which is pretty rare, but it happened in one case. And then the symptoms, again, mimic summer patch. Now, getting information from superintendents is pretty difficult in terms of what their programs are and what they've done because it's always changing. But what we've seen in the last few years is everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people started using Chipco Signature because it's an awesome product for summer stress. It gives great Pythium control. And so we started seeing a shift towards using Signature on putting greens to handle, well, really for summer stress, every 2 to 4 weeks. And then people would look at their spray program and say, I'm covered for Pythium. And for most Pythiums, they would be. But in discussions with Phil Harmon at University of Florida, he said, you know, we've tested some of these Pythium strains with these phosphonate and phosphite products in Petri plates, and there's a couple species that just don't seem to be affected by Signature or those phosphite-based products. And I said, oh, yeah, which ones? And he said, oh, well, these two that you're dealing with, those are the ones that were not effectively controlled. So what we think that is happening is that by putting out Signature, you're controlling all those aggressive Pythiums that are really the major players. But in doing that, you're suppressing them and allowing some of these weaker Pythiums that normally would not cause a problem at all. You're allowing them to get a foothold. And so what I tell people, this is kind of my brief overview, is scout areas that you suspect that you know, you have a problem with. If you're dealing with summer patch that you feel like you can't get a handle on, it's worth sending a sample and asking people to look for Pythium in the foliage. This is not a root problem, it's a foliar problem. I also tell people, don't get off your Signature program. I'm not trying to say that that's not the program to be on. It's a great program. But don't forget about those traditional Pythium fungicides when you get into favorable conditions for Pythium diseases, or if you see something like summer patch that you can't control with thiophanate methyl. In terms of application strategies, this is a foliar problem. Don't water it in. And an application of Banal or Segway, literally overnight, it'll start to cause this to start to go away. And it's one of the surprising things that people see, like, oh, I sprayed Banal, and man, within 24 hours I could see it clearing up. So I think the biggest problem is just misdiagnosis. You never would think it was a Pythium problem, so you wouldn't be putting a Pythium spray down, and then the second you do, it starts to clear up. And so that's kind of our recommendations for this problem. And so I mention it just as a be on the lookout, but not really that it's a major problem. Okay, the last thing I wanted to mention, every time you travel, anytime you hear about something else going on in another area, there's always like a new problem that's popping up. And I don't know anything about this problem, but if there's anybody from Australia that watches this back, I just wanted to point it out because it's becoming a major issue for them. They have a problem called, they call it BF1, and essentially it stands for black fungus, and this must be something that they isolated out. I talked to Percy Wong, and I actually sent him an email. He was I think he's retired as a professor, but he still does a lot of work in Australia, and he's identified the organism. I haven't talked to him about what it is, but he's identified the organism and he's ready to publish on it. But essentially it's a new organism that's causing what I would say are like spring dead spot like symptoms, and it's kind of blowing through a lot of the fairways and areas in Australia and some of the other places. And so it's like a new fungus that's coming out. And we saw this in the 90s with bentgrass dead spot. We saw it with rapid blight on the West Coast. We've seen it with brown ring patch, although it probably wasn't new. Now we're seeing it with thatch collapse. So you always have to be on the lookout for new potential things. All right, so that's kind of my 2014 what to look at. And now I'll get into my turf technology, and I'll probably take 5 minutes tops to kind of go through this. I just wanted to talk about some of the things that I've been working on and that I've actually been working with Turf Republic on, and what that impact's going to be this year, I think, in terms of our communication. One of the things that it's not groundbreaking, but the shift away from being on your computer and relying more on your tablet or your smartphone is incredible. The traffic that's being driven to websites now has shifted in the last couple of years from being heavily focused towards your desktop or your laptop to now being mobile, and I think that offers up a lot of technology that we can use. And if you combine that with the idea of what social media is, which I won't read these, but basically it's an interactive dialogue. It's not a one-way street of information. It's an interactive dialogue, and it allows us to exchange user-generated content. I think that's the important aspect of really what social media is. It's not like Facebook. Facebook is a component of social media, but that's not social media. But if you look at Facebook, people can post pictures, people can comment, people can exchange information. So it's that user-generated interactive dialogue. The next thing I think that is big, and a lot of people don't use this, not necessarily Foursquare, but they don't use location-based services all that much, but some people do. They really take advantage of having their smartphone, getting directions based on GPS, getting suggestions for places where they're located, and location-based services are really kind of the next thing. They're actually the thing now, but they're the next thing for turf because we're always behind. And if you had any reason to go on and find something that was associated with location-based services and you want to download a free app, this is the one I recommend. If you drink beer, Untapped, UNTAPPD is a free app. I love it. It basically gives you recommendations. There's gamification in it, so you earn badges. But it really actually helps you. Like as you drink more certain styles of beer, it recommends like, oh, you're near this place, or you should try that beer. So it basically starts to learn your preferences and then offer suggestions based on what your friends think, based on what's globally popular, based on what's near you. And that was really the idea. Actually, Untapped is probably one of the main reasons that we ended up going through and building TurfPath, which is the mobile app where we can allow users to generate content and share and exchange information. That's really what it was about. And so we set this up as a way to track, identify, and solve turfgrass pest problems with the primary idea that we're looking at insects, weeds, and diseases. And so just to give you an idea, if you're not familiar with TurfPath, this is an app that I launched in April of 2013, and it's essentially a way to track turf pests and the different components. We have pest descriptions. You can go through and read about the different pests. You can get more detail about them. You can see what the problem is, how to identify it. You can have people comment on it. We have photo galleries, so you can help identify the problems that you may have in the field. You can see, okay, here's what take-all patch looks like. And we also have some control options, and so you can get fungicides, you can see labels, you can find out the highlights and what diseases that they may control, or weeds. And so here you can go in and look at them, and then you have the information, the fungicide group or the FRAC code, the diseases that are suppressed, active ingredients, some basic information. You can also download the labels. We have a lot of other things in there. It's a pretty robust app and probably overwhelming for some people when they first log into it, like, oh my God, there's so much, I don't know what to do about it. But we do have information about diagnostic labs, and you can click on those icons and get information about them. But really the heart of it is it's location-based information, and the idea is that users, homeowners, home lawn care providers, athletic fields, golf course people, they will give a heads up as to what is active or going on or the major problem in their area at any given point in time. And you can search this based on the map. You can do it based on what's near you. This is a shout out to Rick Paget, who's probably not watching this, but will watch it back. He's probably the most active user in TurfPath, and anytime he sees anything that's going on the golf course, active dollar spot, active disease, he puts it in there. And what this does is it allows anybody within a certain radius to basically look at his post and say, hey, that person checked in dollar spot being active. This is a week early. I wouldn't have expected it, but he's seeing it, so now I know it's coming. And so it's a way to update people that are near you, as well as people that are in the general area or nationally. And so what I liked about it, it's crowdsourced updates. You can put in information on there. You can say, hey, I have a problem. How do I solve it? And people will respond and answer to you. And so essentially it allows peer-to-peer help with this kind of thing. And then we also have videos and events and news and just things that you can go on there, and that changes on a daily or a weekly basis, and so there's always something new to see. And the thing I really like about it, and which, you know, one of the main reasons I wanted to build this, is that it has social integration into it, right? So you can link it to your Foursquare account, you can link it to Facebook, you can link it to Twitter. You can earn badges for participating and doing things, and we routinely have giveaways and prizes and all kinds of different things to encourage use. But it's really a powerful tool to be able to solve problems relatively quickly while you're in the field. And then I'll give a shout out to, we launched a polar vortex photo contest. So essentially, after all this buzz about the polar vortex in the last few weeks and the problems, I thought, you know, as a photographer, there's got to be some superintendents that got crazy good images out there of what the course looked like, or what your home lawn looked like, or your athletic field. And so we're doing a contest where we're going to give away a prize for the best polar vortex image. So you can go to the app and download it and check it out. It's just a free app you can find on Droid or Google services. All right, last thing, wrapping it up here. Bill, I know you want me to shut up, so I'm going to wrap it up here. But all right, turf diseases. This was the essentially started out as a blog that I started in May of 2009, and it started out with 5 of us. There was myself, Frank Wong, Lane Treadway, Jim Kearns, and Megan Keneally. And the idea was that I would call and harass these people every week and say, hey, you're posting on Monday, I'm posting on Tuesday, someone's posting Wednesday. We posted once a week. And it got to the point where I was literally calling these people and harassing them. Like, hey, it's 8 o'clock at night, haven't seen your post yet, get it up. And that's actually what made it successful. We were constantly posting. But because of shifting focuses, you know, Frank and Lane went to industry, and I didn't think it was right having them have that platform to talk about when they went to industry. So we kind of said, all right, we have to kind of have you guys step aside. And then everybody started developing their own blogs, and it slowed. You know, our activity on turf diseases slowed in 2012, and then really in 2013. And we started doing turf chats and some other things. But when Bill, who organized this, contacted me and said, you know, hey, I think we can help you. We can make turf diseases better, and we can, you know, revive it. And so I talked to him and said, all right, you guys can take over, man. Run with it. I don't care what you do with it. Just, you know, make it better. Let me know what we can do and how I can help. And so essentially, they've done that. They're going to go through a redesign of the website, but right now it's at least active. And we're starting to get consistent updates. And the way we did this is we just got additional authors. And I think that we have 9 new authors this year that are going to be providing monthly updates. And so it's going to be awesome. Like, we've already got a few new updates on the site this week, and I know our level of interest and activity has increased. And we've got great authors. We've got Dr. Dernoden, who just retired and just won the USGA Green Section Award. He's going to write a bit every month. Dr. Latin, who wrote his fungicide book, or the Turfgrass fungicide book, is contributing. And also Dr. Bruce Martin from Clemson, who just won the GCSA Distinguished Service Award. He's going to be posting every month. And then we have a bunch of other people that I don't want to give away because they're going to start to roll out this month. But what you're going to see is about 9 new posts per month, which works out to a post every 3 to 4 days. And they're going to be sharing either research information or the latest thing that's happening in their area. And we're going to get back to what we started the blog with. And I think it's going to be a huge asset to the turf managers out there. So essentially, it's going to continue to be updates for the pros, by the pros, with Turf Republic really driving the force. So I want to thank them for that. I won't talk about these. I'll leave them up here, and then anybody that's watching back can see it. I'll leave it on the slide. But that's really it. I got some apps worth checking out in 2014, from the green industry to productivity apps, from social media, you know, how you can share information, and then also my favorites that range from camera apps like Camera Plus to paying for Starbucks to even Candy Crush. Yes, I am a user of Candy Crush. I'm at level 205 and my wife's at level 270 something, so I got a lot of catching up to do before I reach up to her. So that's it. I just kind of wanted to give some disease trends and technology trends to think about as we move into 2014, and I look forward to seeing what the year brings.